The radio crackled once, then fell silent, and in that silence something heavy settled over the airfield. Dust hung unmoving in the heat, rotor blades stood still, and the mountains beyond the wire looked closer than they should have. When the voice finally came through the command net, it was thin and shaking. Any Apache pilot on base? The question wasn't loud, wasn't dramatic. It was almost embarrassed, like it didn't expect an answer. No one spoke. Officers looked at one another. Pilots were downrange, grounded by weather, or simply gone. The silence stretched, and somewhere far beyond the perimeter, 44 soldiers were running out of time. Lena Morales was elbow-deep in the open belly of an Apache when she heard it. Grease stained her sleeves, sweat traced lines through the dust on her face, and the familiar smell of fuel and metal clung to her like a second skin. She had been awake for nearly 20 hours, chasing a vibration issue that no one else could quite pin down. To most of the base, she was just the mechanic, the one who could coax a wounded bird back into the sky when others shook their heads. She froze when the call repeated, softer this time, as if hope itself was shrinking. Any Apache pilot on base? Lena wiped her hands on a rag and looked around the hangar. The other maintainers had stopped moving too. They all knew what that call meant. Somewhere out there, a convoy or a patrol had been ambushed. Somewhere, soldiers were pinned down, counting rounds, counting breaths. 44 lives, the number would come later, but even now the weight of it pressed into her chest. She felt the old ache rise, the one she kept buried beneath torque wrenches and checklists. She hadn't always been a mechanic. Years ago, before a knee injury and a line of bad luck, she had been a pilot trainee. She had flown Apaches in simulators, memorized emergency procedures until they haunted her dreams, and tasted the strange joy of lifting a machine heavier than fear into the air. But injuries don't care about dreams. Paperwork followed. Decisions were made. Lena learned to keep helicopters flying instead of flying them herself. She told herself it was enough. The radio hissed again. No answer. The operations tent was quiet, too quiet. Lena could picture the faces inside. Commanders weighing rules against consequences, pilots grounded by orders written far away. She also pictured the Apache in front of her. She had rebuilt its transmission with her own hands. She knew every sound it made, every stubborn quirk. It was flyable. She was flyable. Her heart hammered as she stepped out of the hangar and toward the operations tent. Each step felt heavier than the last. She could turn back at any moment, disappear into the comfort of her job, into the safety of being unseen. But the silence on the radio followed her, and with it the image of soldiers crouched behind rocks, waiting for help that might never come. Inside the tent, the air was thick with tension. Maps were spread across tables, red markers clustered like wounds on the terrain. When Lena spoke, her voice surprised even her with how steady it sounded. "I can fly." Every head turned. A few eyebrows lifted. Someone let out a short, humorless laugh. "You're a mechanic," an officer said, not unkindly, just stating a fact everyone thought they knew. "I'm qualified," Lena replied. "Apache. Night, low level, weapons hot. I haven't flown in a while, but the muscle memory's there. And that bird out there." She pointed toward the hangar. "She's ready. I made sure of it." The commander hesitated. Rules flashed across his face like storm clouds. So did the knowledge that time was bleeding away. The radio crackled again, this time carrying the sound of gunfire in the background. The voice on the other end was strained, breathless. "We're surrounded. We need air now." The commander looked at Lena, really looked at her, and saw not a mechanic, but a soldier asking to shoulder a burden no one else could. He nodded once. "Get her up." The scramble that followed was a blur. Lena ran through checklists as she climbed into the cockpit, hands moving on instinct. The Apache felt different from the mechanic's seat, familiar and strange all at once. As the engine spooled up, the vibration hummed through her bones like an old song. She closed her eyes for half a second, breathing in the moment, then lifted off. The mountains rushed toward her as she flew low, using the terrain to stay hidden. The radio fed her fragments of chaos, calls for medevac, coordinates shouted over gunfire, fear sharpened into urgency. Her co-pilot seat was empty, but she didn't feel alone. Every hour she had spent fixing these machines, every late night spent listening to pilots talk about missions, every dream she thought she'd lost sat beside her now. When she crested the ridge and saw the battlefield, her breath caught. Smoke curled from the ground. Muzzle flashes flickered like cruel stars. 44 soldiers were spread across a narrow valley, pinned down by fighters dug into higher ground. Lena felt the old training snap into place. Fear narrowed into focus. She lined up her approach. The first rocket roared away from the Apache, and the explosion echoed off the rocks. Enemy fire scattered. She brought the gun to bear, controlled bursts cutting through positions that had held the soldiers hostage. The Apache danced under her hands, responsive and alive. She moved with it, not against it, trusting the machine she knew better than anyone. On the ground, heads lifted. Shouts turned from panic to disbelief. Over the radio, someone yelled, "We've got air! We've got air!" Lena circled, marking targets, clearing paths. She took fire, alarms screaming in her headset, but she stayed steady, adjusting, adapting. When a rocket pod jammed, she fixed it mid-flight, hands moving with the confidence born of years of repair work. When fuel dipped lower than she liked, she calculated margins and kept going. Minutes stretched into an eternity. By the time the last enemy position went quiet, the valley felt eerily still. The soldiers began to move, carrying their wounded, regrouping under the watchful shadow of the Apache overhead. Lena stayed until the last transport bird arrived, until she knew every one of them was on their way out. The flight back was quieter. Exhaustion crept in now that adrenaline loosened its grip. When she landed, the base was waiting. No cheers, no grand gestures, just soldiers standing a little straighter, eyes following her as she shut down the engines and climbed out. The commander met her on the tarmac. He didn't say much, he just held out his hand. 44, he said. That's how many walked away because you answered that call. Lena looked back at the Apache, at the grease stains still on her sleeves, and felt something inside her finally settle. She had been a mechanic, a pilot, a soldier, all at once. Titles didn't matter. What mattered was that when the silence fell, she broke it. That night, as the base lights glowed against the dark, Lena sat alone on a crate outside the hangar. The world felt quieter now, but it was a good quiet, earned and deep. She thought of the radio call, of how close it had come to being unanswered, and of how many lives depended on someone stepping forward despite fear, despite doubt. Sometimes heroes don't wear the title you expect. Sometimes they're the ones keeping things running in the background, waiting for the moment when everything they've learned finally matters. And, when that moment comes, when the question hangs in the air and no one answers, they stand up, speak out, and change the story, for themselves, and for everyone who gets to go home because of it.